Welcome, Muofhe, and welcome to the viewers to this Encounter South African International Documentary Film Festival Q&A session. I have the privilege of speaking to Muofhe Raphunga, a graduate of UCT. I'm hosting a series of Q&A sessions with the 3 UCT filmmakers that have been selected for Encounters 2020. My name is Julia Cain. I'm from the Center for Film and Media Studies at UCT, and it is a pleasure to have the opportunity to chat with these 3 filmmakers. So our focus for today is on a film called The Red Place. This film was completed last year as part of Muofhe's honors in film theory and practice. Muofhe worked with a small team that included herself as director, Gina Robinson as both producer and cinematographer, and Pauline Shrewsbury as editor. As for Muofhe herself, she is an enthusiastic individual with a keen eye for detail whose energy is influential and, as I can speak from direct experience, also infectious. She works hard to exceed to her greatest potential and has an interest in learning new techniques in media and has an innovative mindset and a constant desire to evolve. Muofhe obtained a bachelor's degree in motion pictures, television production, and sound design from AFDA in 2012. She went on to work in industry as an audio assistant at ENCA and then an audio recordist at CapeNet. And last year she came to the University of Cape Town to do her BA honors in film theory and practice. So let's get to it, Muofhe. Welcome. So lovely to have you here.
Of course.
So let's jump straight to the film itself, The Red Place. It's a really, I think, an important film that came out and really stood out as a student in production with the weight of the material and the subject matter that you took on. The film is about, as the tagline puts it, in a very poetic way, the colors of forgiveness. It's an incredibly relevant and profound topic for South Africans. Can you speak to us about what the film contributes to this national discussion on forgiveness, and what did you want to say or what did you want to do in the making of this film?
Okay, thank you, and it's good to see you, Julia. I think it's not a secret that South Africa has gone through apartheid, segregation, and white supremacy imposing authority on the Black and other communities. But what I wanted to kind of bring out was that we are all humans at the end of the day. Whether we are oppressors or whether we are being oppressed, it is all about being a human being and finding that common ground of helping one another. So I think my point was that I wanted to help the viewers as well as the people, the subjects in the documentary. So as the documentary, at the end of the documentary, we have kind of concluded that it is a process. So I think as a South African, I want to kind of understand the process of forgiveness. So as South Africans, we also need to understand that we will not be able to just switch and say we forgive of what happened in the past, but to understand that it is also a process to get to that point where we are content with where we are today. So what I just wanted to have and concluding that documentary was more about we are all humans at the end of the day.
Okay, great. And I know that the film you pitched at the beginning of 2019 to your classmates and that was selected, that idea, you always wanted to grapple with this idea of forgiveness and in the context of South Africa, but the idea of how you would address that subject really evolved over the course of last year. Can you speak a little bit about how it changed and how it evolved?
Firstly, it was my first in the beginning when I pitched it, it was all about helping other people. And I remember I pitched it and it was a success, but then there was one question that you asked me and you said, why is it so important to you? And that question lingered for a very long time, for like a week or two. And I started asking myself, why is it so important to me? And as the film progressed, I couldn't find the foundation. And I think my story had to come in to create a foundation for the film. So when it started, it was all about helping people, but then in the end, it ended up being about their stories helping me in the process of making the film. So that's what exactly happened.
Okay, and so I know this inclusion of yourself wasn't an easy decision, um, and yeah, and how you would include yourself, you know, that also evolved over the course of the making of the film. How do you think it changed the film, or what impact do you think it had in including yourself and your own very personal story in the film?
Honestly, it was not easy. You know it. I kept on coming to you and asking if I could be removed out of the story, but it was not easy. Going home and uncovering the most painful wounds you can ever think for other, you know, for yourself. But I think at the same time, it was a good thing. Um, you know, personally, it helped me a lot. I didn't want to. I didn't want the film to be perceived in a theoretical way, but rather in a, you know, for people to relate to it. So I think the fact that I included myself in the documentary kind of helped the audience to relate to the story, that we are also humans. And as a director for documentaries, I think it is very, very important that we put ourselves in the documentaries once in a while to kind of help audience relate to it, because it's easy for audience to disconnect from a story. It is it's not it's better with a film, but with a documentary it's very, very easy to disconnect as an audience while watching a documentary. So I think to kind of put myself in there, it was more like I can relate and they can relate to me. I'm rather, yes, writing the script, but I'm also human at the end of the day. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that sort of emotional resonance that came through from including yourself was, you know, it was very evocative and it was very affecting, I think, in terms of how an audience experiences the film, The Red Place.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think also because, you know, the thing is with documentaries, we have, it's about facts and reality, and there's no manipulation of music. Of course there is, but like there's not manipulation of the storyline. The storyline, it is the way it is, but our stories involving ourselves in it kind of increases or enhances the relationship between the story and audiences, or the directors, between the audience and the directors. So that relationship kind of needs to build up in between watching the documentaries and, you know, all these things. So I think including ourselves once in a while is very, very, very important. So including myself was difficult, like I said, but the fact that I gave it time and it kind of like manifested into something that I did not expect. So yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think just that whole centering of yourself as a young Black South African woman, and telling this story and grappling with this issue from your perspective was, yeah, so important, really, and a really important contribution to this national discussion around forgiveness.
Yeah.
So you also you included two very high profile characters or subjects, documentary subjects in your film, Judge Albie Sachs and Candace Mama, and you also included a close family friend, as well as an anonymous survivor of GBV, a very sort of a young woman who's experienced violence in the contemporary context. Um, it, can you speak a little bit about your inclusion of such diverse characters and diverse stories?
Yeah. So South Africa is all about diversity. I mean, Rainbow Nation, you know. So what I wanted to do was also, you know, forgiveness is a universal theme. It's everywhere. It's how you get it out of the world, you know, as a filmmaker. And I wanted to kind of have like different perspective of generations, and from old to, you know, the upcoming, and, you know, all these different steps of um, finding out on how you solve situations. I mean, back in the day, they did not have enough therapists, but now we do. So when we go through things, we intend to go to the therapist rather than how do they handle it back in the day and how we handle situations that we go through every single day. So I wanted to kind of have like that different generational perspective of how we deal with issues every day. And also I wanted to have different backgrounds. So what they brought was their backgrounds and what they've been through. And that kind of helped me center myself on understanding different generational issues and how we can solve it.
Okay. And so both Judge Albie Sachs and Candace Mama, different generations themselves, but certainly talking about bringing that historical aspect of the violence of apartheid into your story. Can you speak a little bit about what both of them contributed to the film?
I think for Mr. Albie Sachs, it was more about what has happened with him. I mean, he got bombed in 1998 and in Mozambique. And when that happened for him, he had a lot of experience of emotionally, and also it was because of the government. So for me to go into that, it was about finding out, because he's a white man, firstly. Secondly, something to happen to him as a white person, you wouldn't think that would happen to him. So I wanted to go into that it wasn't only that Black people went through that, also other white people went through that. So I kind of needed to get different perspective, like I said. And as for Candace Mama, she is almost the same age as myself. So I wanted to know what has happened to her, because somebody that is a loved one, and for me, we had a similar situation, and how we dealt with them was kind of similar. So what I wanted to do was kind of like dive into the past and dive into the future and how we solve our issues. So for me to have Candace and Mr. Albie Sachs was not only about the past, but how we can move forward.
Okay. And I mean, I think a lot of, you spoke about that having different generations and those perspectives in terms of grappling with forgiveness. I think your characters who spoke about historical events from the apartheid past and violence experienced, and then the inclusion of the GBV survivor. I thought the way you interviewed them was you really got to, you know, the very personal way that people deal with experiences. So while some of those experiences were very sort of, I mean, especially in the context of Albie Sachs and even with Candace Mama, very public events in South African history. And then you have that very sort of silent, private, secret experience of the anonymous GBV survivor. Why did you include her? Because she was in some ways an outlier in terms of the types of experiences that you spoke about in terms of yourself and the other two characters.
I think with them, they, like you said, they are public figures. So that kind of made audience disconnect, because they could Google that and understand that what they went through. And I think the also emotionally connecting with them was kind of like there was a little bit of a wall that I felt that came across. But with the other subject, it was more about let them relate, let audience relate. It's not only the public figures that go through that, also normal people go through some things and it's difficult for them. And I think when she said she did struggle and she still is struggling to forgive, that kind of like gave it a different of a perspective of forgiveness. It's not only the happy ending of, you know what, I went through the process and I have forgiven the perpetrator, but more of it is a process, I'm still going through it. So I wanted to have different steps of how do we get to forgiveness. It is not only the who, ta-ta-ta, rainbow, everything is okay, but it was also that I'm still going through it, and it is difficult for me to forgive that person. So to have those different times, it was more also like emotionally connecting with audience. Because if you go and Google and say, who is LB Sachs, you will find the story. And if you go and Google, you find Candice Mama. But if you go and find that one, it's more like, how do you deal with it? And I feel like South Africans don't really go into that, more on the normal people, that what is the process? What did you go through? How did you, why don't you want to forgive? Because we can be human and say we don't want to forgive, and we judge that person and say, you don't want to forgive. Why don't you want to forgive? I mean, you need to forgive. But for me to have her, it was more about her story than her herself. Just to be like, it was a process for you, and it still is a process, because they have forgiven, but she's more like, she's hesitant on why should she forgive, because of what she's been exposed to. So having different steps of forgiveness and having different kinds of people to come forth and speak about their process was what the experience, I mean to say, was more about, let's relate, even though you disconnect, but I kind of like wanted to have disconnect, emotional imbalancement. So I wanted that to kind of like, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that when the team had their academic screening at the end of last year, we had Professor Pumla Gobodo Madikizela, who was the respondent. So I'm sure most people know her name, but for those who don't, she's from Stellenbosch University and heads up the historical trauma and transformation department there. And I think there is more of a centering on having these kind of discussions in South Africa about intergenerational trauma, about this discussion of forgiveness or not, and within this specific context and history of South Africa that has, that has certainly marked the current society and where we are today. The film was your directorial debut. Can you speak about some of the key lessons that you learned over the process of making this film?
Well, I learned a lot, I must say. I think because my background is sound designing. So I've always been in the corner with my microphones and listening to everybody's conversations, but it was never being about giving directions or writing scripts or coming up with ideas. But even though I had them in my mind, but I did not really think that they would come to life. I had visions and, but I never thought I would have to, bring them to life. So what I learned was that I need to be more, I learned to be a leader. I think that was the first thing that I learned, to be a leader. I think I'm still learning as well, to kind of like be vocal about my vision. I think you keep it into your head, and sometimes you stay in your head for too long that you don't think everybody else will understand what you're trying to say. But at the end of the day, I'm still learning as well. I started last year. It hasn't even been 12 months yet. But yeah, that's also the skill, things that I learned. I also learned to be patient and understanding that we're all from different backgrounds and that we all have different missions. But at the end of the day, it's all about telling stories. And so I learned that as well. And risk taking. I mean, the first time I pitched in at the idea, you asked me again a question, and you said, would you direct? And I said, no, I don't want to direct it. It's okay, I can give it to somebody else and they can do it, but this is the idea that I have. And then things happened, and then I ended up being the director. And yeah, so I think risk taking, that's also what I've learned. I learned to be confident in my work, and I'm learning to also be like confident as well. So yeah.
Well, I think that's fabulous. And I think it's wonderful that this film has really launched you as an up-and-coming young filmmaker in South Africa. It's wonderful to have your world premiere with Encounters. What's next for you? What's happening now?
I'm actually busy with one right now. It's actually part of a trilogy. So the first trilogy is more like about bringing women from different backgrounds. I love backgrounds. So I think we learn from that every time. So it's basically about women coming from different backgrounds and to be So basically, I'm trying to be I'm trying to be discreet about it and not tell everything, but basically it's about bringing women from the creative industry, and from photographers to chefs to architects. So we're just coming together to discuss on the way forward in the industries that we are in, the creative industry. So that's basically what I'm busy with, and I'm going to keep on trying to research and find more stories and show the true South Africa. Our country is such a beautiful place. So I want to kind of show that beautiful side of our country.
Thank you very much. I think it's wonderful to have you, and yeah, to be contributing to being a South African, telling South African stories.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for your time, and thanks
Yeah.
to everyone who's out there viewing this. And yeah, best wishes for going forward. And for those of you watching here, if you haven't seen The Red Place, please do check it out this week in Encounters Online Festival. Thanks.